No.
All right, welcome everyone to the ANC 34G meeting. This is our regularly scheduled meeting, second meeting in January. We meet on the second and fourth Mondays of each month. I'm Randy Speck. I'm the chair of the commission. I represent the single member district that's ANC 34G03. And that's basically the area between Nebraska and Utah and Broad Branch. And we'll first begin tonight by introducing the other commissioners. And John, you want to start?
I'm a newly elected commissioner. I represent small district 02, which is basically between Rock Creek and Utah and military.
Peter?
I too am a new commissioner, Peter Gosselin. I represent the spectacular swath of Chevy Chase from the Western Avenue border with Maryland to the Chevy Chase Fountain, from there to Military Road, the entire west side of the Connecticut Avenue Commercial District back to 41st Street with the peninsula on the east side. My district is probably the most urban, something like 25% of people in apartment buildings and multifamily housing.
Chris?
Chris Fromboludi. I represent 3G07, which is the southernmost district in our ANC, founded by military, Reno, Nebraska, and Nevada. And welcome everybody.
Connie?
Hi, I'm Connie Chang. I'm also a newly elected commissioner. Welcome. I am the commissioner for District 5, which is it's sort of East Connecticut going around to Western. It comes down Broad Branch Road and a little bit of what Peter was saying off to Peter's side are some constituents of mine. Thank you so much.
And Lisa?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Gore, also newly elected, and I represent single member district 01, which is close to Rock Creek Park along Oregon Avenue, Western Avenue, past Pinehurst Circle to Upland, then back over towards the Pinehurst tributary off of Aberfoyle and Beach, and then up Oregon Avenue that way. Thank you for coming.
Okay, we have 6 commissioners here now. I expect Commissioner Zeldin to join us very shortly. He couldn't be on at the beginning of the meeting, but we have a quorum, and so we can conduct business tonight.
Could I ask a question? I'm seeing notes from people who say that the link that was in the agenda, that's in the agenda on the listserv, isn't working. Do we know anything about that?
No, it should work.
Well, let me resend it, see if I can.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I copy it right?
No, that link should work just fine.
Okay. Let
And then
me.
I see a number of people who have joined, so presumably they found it one way or another. Okay, we'll conduct this meeting as we have on all of our meetings since April, virtually, and we're conducting them on a webinar so that the commissioners are all panelists and we have audio and video. However, we can identify attendees and we can turn their audio and video on if they have something to say. If you have any comments or questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Either one of those will work, and we'll try to monitor those as we go through. But if we don't catch every question and every comment, then we'll make copies of them and make sure that we take a look at them later and try to get back to you on them. We're spending most of the night tonight talking about one single issue, and that is the reports of the Task Force on Racism. When we get to that part of the agenda, I'll be describing some more detailed procedures about how we're going to proceed there. I would just remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and that we will put the recording up on the ANC's YouTube channel. Okay, the next thing we need to do is adopt our agenda. The agenda was posted on the various listservs and on the ANC's website. There's one modification that we're making to the agenda, and that is the deletion of the first substantive item, which was the discussion and possible vote on public space permit application at 3600 Rittenhouse Street. And that application is just not quite ready for our review, and there's no urgency on it because the Public Space Committee is not going to get to it until its February meeting. And so we're going to postpone that and put that item on our agenda for our February 8th meeting. So with that modification to the agenda, is there any other change or modification to the agenda that we need to make? All those in favor of adopting the agenda, raise your hand. 6-0, okay. I'm going to begin tonight with, as we usually do, with some announcements. One is with regard to COVID-19 vaccinations. There's obviously a great deal of interest in the community about how to get an appointment for a vaccination and how that process is going. The district does appear to be doing a better job than some other jurisdictions in our region, but there have nevertheless been some issues with the district's process. And it's been difficult for some people, particularly for some of our seniors, to get appointments for vaccinations. And so we know that there's been some frustration in that process, and we have collected some information on vaccinations that we put on our website. If you go to our website, anc3g.org, there's a heading for COVID-19, and if you go there, you can see a lot of the information we've compiled, at least about the vaccination process and how you might be able to get an appointment. The next item I have for announcement is that the Department of Parks and Recreation is going to be hosting a series of virtual meetings to discuss the recreation needs and desires of different neighborhoods. And the meeting for Ward 3 is on February 2nd from 6:30 until 8. And the meeting for Ward 4 is on February 4th from 6:30 to 8. And the links for registration for those meetings are available on DPR's website. We'll try to put those in our minutes as well. And although many of the DPR facilities are now closed due to the public health emergency, it is important to let DPR know what our needs are now and once the emergency is over. And so more information, as I said, is available at the DPR website. It's actually at ready2playdc.com. And you can find out more information there. Okay, the last announcement I have is with regard to the council's oversight hearings. Each year, the council has hearings on every district agency to assess their performance over the past year. And it's a unique opportunity really for ANC residents, ANC members, commissioners and residents, and any others who want to tell the council and the agency how the agencies have performed. The ANC testified at 11 of these oversight hearings in 2020 and at 8 oversight hearings in 2019. And so we expect that we will probably submit testimony at some of the oversight hearings again this year for the agencies, particularly that we've had a lot of contact with and have some way to assess their performance. The hearings are generally held in February and March, and there's a draft schedule and the process for testifying that's available on the council's website. Okay, any other commissioners have announcements that they want to make? Lisa?
Just wanted to announce that I am working with Councilmember Lewis George's staff to try to get a standalone meeting with her and the members of my single member district to discuss the Chestnut Street sidewalk project. So tentatively, we had scheduled a meeting for this Friday. I'm still waiting to hear back, but I definitely encourage anyone that's a member of or lives within single member district 01 to send me an email at 3g01@anc.dc.gov. If you're not on my email list, so that I can make sure that you can attend the meeting and send a link to you.
Okay, any other commissioners? I will mention one other thing. It was a follow-up really to our meeting from January 11th, when we talked primarily during that meeting about the proposal to relocate Lafayette Elementary School's pre-K. There's still a lot of activities going on that issue. We've gotten a response from Chancellor Fairby to our resolution that we passed on the 11th. We've also, the LSAT at Lafayette has also submitted a letter about that, about the proposal. And so there are continuing discussions going on. No decision has been made yet, but we're still trying to influence that decision as best we can. I had another conversation this morning with the Episcopal Children's Center, the CEO there, and they are still interested in leasing some of their space for the Lafayette pre-K, at least on a temporary basis. And so we're still continuing to pursue that. And as soon as we get any resolution from DCPS, we'll pass it on to the community. Okay, any community announcements? Let's see if there's anything in the chat on that.
Looks like we
Okay,
have
2 hands up.
people
Let's
that raised their
see.
hand. Mhm.
Yeah, you want to recognize them, Lisa, and
Yeah.
let them make an announcement?
You can go ahead. G.H. Orwells.
Hi, my name's George Orwells. I am off of Connecticut Ave. I wanted to see, is the ANC tonight taking up comp plan stuff?
No, we're not.
Okay. I just want to, for the community, and just as an announcement, there's this concept of gentle density being pushed by the Office of Planning, and that, Ward 3 and the corridors up in Northwest should take on their fair share of affordable housing. And while I agree with that in its intent, the ultimate reality of that is, with just upzoning, we're not going to get affordable housing. There has to be, some real, a sense of, like a string attached to this. If we're going to give away all these air rights in the upflumbing, therefore upzoning ultimately, that those air rights should be directly connected to truly affordable family-size housing.
George, if I could just interrupt for a second. That is a part of the discussion that we're going to have with regard to the Task Force on Racism's recommendations. There was a housing working group there. And so we will be discussing that later in the meeting tonight.
Okay.
If you want to just wait for that.
I appreciate that. And one other point, if I could just, on this line of the comp plan, which is so very important, everybody should know about it. There is laws, the statute to amending the comp plan talk about impact assessments that are supposed to come with the comp plan changes. Mm-hmm. And when I reached out to Chairman Mendelson's chief staffer who's working on this, Julia Koster, she told me there is no progress reports and there is no real impact assessments with the proposed hundreds of changes, not even specific to the maps. The significant changes to the maps. Andrew Trueblood has admitted that the map changes will bring online, matter of right, 200 million square feet of developable air rights. And to have that done, when you bring on this much population growth, there's going to be impacts, right? And so shouldn't we be looking at that if we just go along with it? And it's just not happening.
Okay, thank you, George.
Thank you.
Our commission has done quite a lot really on the comp plan there. If you look on our website, again, anc3g.org, we have under task forces, you look under comp plan, and there's a lot of information there. We had a resolution on the comp plan We had a lengthy task force report on it, and we've had actually a couple of resolutions on it. Okay, before we get to Emir's announcements, though, I see Commissioner Zeldin has joined us. Michael, you want to introduce yourself? You're muted.
Sorry first for being late. And as to who I am Michael Zeldin. I represent 3G04. I'm a newly elected commissioner. Prior to being a commissioner, I worked as a lawyer and I played one on TV for CNN.
Okay, thank you, Michael. All right, Emir, you have an announcement?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Emir Gur-Ravantab. I'm one of the Ward 3 liaisons. Our Ward 4 partner couldn't join us today as she's on leave, so I'll be here instead. I mainly want to talk about the vaccine. So before I get to that, quick update for DCPS. On Wednesday, there will be a telephone town hall for regarding the Term 3 reopening for DCPS. I will post the event in the chat right now. All right. And regarding the vaccine, just a quick update. This week, we're receiving about 14,000 more doses of the vaccines, both Moderna and Pfizer. About 9,500 of those additional doses are being available to healthcare workers and seniors. And starting today, we have moved on to certain groups of essential workers, including public safety, such as MPD officers and certain essential city workers, such as bus drivers, as well as DCPS in-person staff. So that includes teachers and cleaning staff, anyone who's in person. Through Children's Hospital, DCPS is getting vaccinated at Dunbar High School, 3,900 doses of the Pfizer vaccine for DCPS staff, and MPD is getting vaccinated through Kaiser. We're getting 1,950 doses for them. As for everyone else, starting last week, every Thursday, they have increased the allotment for seniors and healthcare workers within wards 1, 4, 5, 7, and 8. And then Friday mornings at the same time, 9 a.m., the entire city gets access to more appointments. It's actually broken down by zip code because, as you know, some people in this meeting are in Ward 3 and some are in Ward 4. So it's important to know which one. And aside from that, I want everyone to tell anyone they know who is eligible for the vaccine that they can also get appointments through their own hospital instead of the city. If they're a patient at any of the following hospitals, including Howard University, MedStar Georgetown, MedStar Washington Hospital Center, GW Hospital, Sibley Hospital, United Medical Center in Southeast, or Kaiser Permanente, to sign up through those hospitals and try to get the first vaccine dose that's available to you. Oh, and could someone else please tell me how many participants are in the chat?
25.
Okay, thank you. I
And
can take any questions.
so Amir, that's 8 panelists, including you. So 7 commissioners,
Okay.
16 attendees.
Okay, John, you got a question?
Yes, Amir, thanks for the update. Just one question here is, what is happening with people and especially seniors who do not have access to the internet to learn about and make appointments?
So we have the coronavirus hotline, and every time you call the hotline, it does tell you who is available or who is available to get appointments. Let me get the number right now. So the number is, I'll post it in the chat too, 855-363-0333. And they can call that number to sign up for appointments directly instead of doing it online, as well as get information. And I also want to add that this week, they are opening up seniors living in DCHA housing facilities to be part of mass testing. So this is one of the opportunities for homebound seniors who can't leave their house. If they're in a large senior home, they will be having testing at those locations done. And one of the DCHA housing facilities is actually located within our ward, Regency House, at least within Ward 3. So that's within, that's on Connecticut Avenue, and I will post the details of who to reach out to. And so there is about, I think, 15 properties in the city that are all eligible for that extension.
Michael?
Yes, hi, Emir. How are you?
How are you?
So I have a question that has been asked of me from seniors in my area, which is with respect to the hospital programs. When you say if they're a patient, if you're a patient of the hospital, what they're wanting to know is, what does that mean? Does it mean that they are a current patient of the hospital, or that they've been a patient within the last year, or some people belong to medical practices that are owned by hospitals. So they're just asking me, what does that mean in terms of should they be calling them, and will they be deemed eligible or ineligible?
That's a very good question. From what I've been told, anyone who's had any inpatient visits, I can get a more precise timeline and spread that to the commissioners and as well as the residents. But what I've been told, people who have had inpatient appointments within a certain amount of time in the recent past, those people are available. So if you, for example, go to Georgetown University Hospital, MedStar Georgetown University Hospital for some kind of appointment, then you can schedule it through them, especially if you're a senior or starting in a couple of weeks, people with conditions.
Okay.
To answer your question,
yeah, if you
be an
could flesh,
inpatient person, be an inpatient, be an in-person patient within a given time, which I can get that more precisely.
okay,
to
because
answer.
the website said a patient now or in the last 2 years, but I'm just trying to figure out what the word patient means, whether,
Yeah, so
requires
someone who comes in
inpatient
for
status,
appointments.
outstation, outpatient, patient from a university-owned medical group. So that's what
By university-owned medical groups, what are you referring to?
some medical doctors' offices are affiliated with university. They're owned by hospitals. Hospitals are buying up medical practices, or medical practices are selling to hospitals because they get under Medicare a higher rate if they're hospital affiliated than if they're not hospital affiliated. So that's what they're taking advantage of. So I'm just wondering what exactly
I
hospital.
want to say if they're getting their appointments through said hospital, like let's say it's one of the satellite campuses for MedStar or George Washington, if it's being booked through that university hospital, sorry, not university hospital, that they should at least try to get their appointment through that hospital, including owned facilities by other hospitals.
Thank you.
Amir, you also have a question in the chat, in the Q&A.
Yeah, I see. So the question is, do I know what is meant by our own hospital for a place to sign up? So that's anywhere you have your appointments in the past 2 years, as you said, if you have in-person appointments at these hospitals, which I can read off the list again. The list is Howard University, MedStar, Georgetown University, MedStar Washington Hospital Center, GW University, Sibley Hospital, UMC United Medical Center, or Kaiser Permanente.
Okay, thank you, Emir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to go into the major part of our meeting tonight, and that's the discussion of the reports and recommendations from the Task Force on Racism. I'm just going to give a brief history of how we got to the point where we are today. In June, on the 8th, the commission adopted a statement on racism and created a task force then on racism to identify equity and justice issues within our community and to propose concrete solutions. The commission discussed the task force on June 22nd at its meeting and emphasized that the task force objective is to focus on substantive issues and specific actions that the commission can take. On July 13th, the commission discussed the framework for the task force to guide its work, including its mission, organization, and a timetable. The mission was to determine its own priorities based on input from the community but to place greatest emphasis on developing realistic steps that the commission can take to impact people's lives. The task force should recommend actionable items with the intent to close the racial divide. The task force was to, quote, prepare a comprehensive report with its findings and recommendations for the commission's consideration no later than October 15, 2020, so the commission may consider those recommendations at its October 26, 2020 meeting. The task force held its first organizational meeting on July 15th and invited all interested residents to participate in its virtual meeting, and 27 people attended. The task force divided itself into 3 working groups: community, education, which became later education and mental health, and housing. The task force members chose whichever groups that they wanted to be in themselves, whatever that interested them. Each of the working groups met multiple times over the next 3 months and developed their reports and recommendations. Each of the working groups presented their draft reports and recommendations to the commission at its October 26th meeting last year. Based on the commissioner's questions and comments on the draft report, the working groups made changes. And based on the revised draft reports, the commission held a town hall meeting on November 16th to get community questions and comments. About 40 residents attended the town hall, in addition to 4 current commissioners and 16 members of the task force. On December 14th, the commission adopted a resolution commending the task force working groups for substantial study, research, analysis, writing, and thought that went into their reports. And in light of the breadth and complexity of the issues addressed and concerns raised about some of the recommendations, the commission deferred any action on the reports and recommendations to the new commission for its consideration in 2021. I want to really compliment particularly the new commissioners who've come on now, because they have thoroughly immersed themselves in those reports, gotten very much up to speed. And that's been really important, I think, for our collective understanding of the reports and the recommendations. The commissioners have had dozens of exchanges trying to understand the reports and to identify areas of agreement and disagreement. And tonight we're prepared to discuss the substance of the recommendations and to hear community input. Let me just describe the procedures that we're going to follow and how we're going to conduct the rest of the meeting tonight. The meeting will be devoted to consideration of each of the task force's 20 recommendations. Assuming that there's no objection, we will address each recommendation from the working groups in this order: community, housing, and then education and mental health. One reason for moving housing ahead of education and mental health is it looks like that's perhaps a shorter discussion. We'll see. For each recommendation, we will first entertain a motion to adopt the working group's recommendation. If there's a second to that motion, the commissioners will discuss the recommendation and may direct questions to a representative of the working group. And tonight, the working groups will be represented by Lisa Gore, Commissioner Gore, on the community working group, Michael Gibbons, who was a leader on the education and mental health working group, and Commissioner Chang for the housing working group. And they'll be here available to answer questions and to assist the commission in its deliberations. Commissioners may propose amendments to the recommendations at any time, and those amendments will be discussed as well. After the commissioners' discussion and before we vote on any recommendation or amendments, we'll take comments and questions from the community. We will generally limit comments, however, to 3 minutes unless there really are or very few people making comments, and we may allow a little bit longer. Finally, we will vote on the original motion to adopt the recommendation or any of the amendments that have been offered. After we voted on all of the recommendations from the working groups, the commission may combine the adopted recommendations into one or more resolutions. And we will try to get through as many of the recommendations as we can tonight. We had a marathon session in our meeting on January 11th that went 4.5 hours almost. And so we're not going to try to do that again tonight. That was unique because we had a deadline we had to meet. But tonight we'll go until 9 o'clock or thereabouts and see how far we can get. And if we don't finish all of the recommendations, then we'll either take them up at a subsequent scheduled meeting or at a special meeting just for this purpose. So we'll see how far we can get tonight. Okay, with that said, we're going to begin with community recommendations, and Commissioner Gore served on that working group and was very instrumental in helping to craft their recommendations. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to make motions to adopt the recommendations and to lead the discussion. Lisa?
Thank you, Randy. So just to get started, the community working group had roughly 10 members on it. Commissioner Shonda Tuck-Garfield was one of the commissioners assigned to that group. And she really moved us through this process to get us forward to where we have the recommendations that we have today. So I definitely want to start out by thanking former Commissioner Tuck-Garfield and all the members of the community working group for all your hard thought leadership and willingness to work together to come together with these recommendations. With that said, I believe we originally had roughly 11 recommendations. We narrowed them down to 8. They are comprised of 3 categories: community input and awareness, physical space, and the last category is support of district policies and recommendations. So I'm going to start out with the first recommendation, and just to go over that before I put it on the floor as a motion. Recommendation number 1 is to establish, and Randy, let me know how you want to do this, because this one is the one for the ongoing task force.
Right.
So I guess we can discuss that during the discussion part, but the recommendation is to establish an ongoing task force on racial equity and adopt a mission statement. So with that, do you want to, Randy, move this to the end, or you want to take the vote on this now and deal with the resolution at the end?
Why don't we do that?
Okay.
Let's just have a motion to adopt that
With the
modification,
okay,
with the amendment that you've suggested.
Okay. So given that, I move that the commission adopt community working group recommendation number 1, establish an ongoing task force on racial equity and adopt a mission statement as amended by striking the language "an ongoing task force on racial equity and adopt a mission statement" and inserting a racial and social equity standing committee. So the friendly amendment, which I'll set my amendment, reads: establish a racial and social equity standing committee. Do I have a second?
Second.
Peter, thank you.
Okay, commissioners, is there any discussion? Peter?
I have a couple of questions. Just let me start off by sort of saying a few things about this. The task force report was a really thoughtful job of trying to cope with what's a complicated issue, which is what we can do here to help close America's, the cities and this community's racial divide. All of us, new commissioners and old task force members and not, now need to work together, work through these recommendations, decide what we can tackle now, later, perhaps in some cases not at all, and how we can get on with the work on this issue. It's a huge task. The previous commission that established the task force said in a resolution last month that the work product was so, in its words, extensive, and didn't even include, in its words, implementation strategies, timeframes, estimated levels of effort, and who would be responsible, who would be the responsible people and organizational agencies to carry them out. But given that our ability as legally as a commission is to influence events, our only ability to influence events is to speak together, we have to now decide. Over the last week or 10 days, I've tried to work on consensus language, and we've all been involved in discussions, sometimes heated with each other, sometimes productive and not. to the extent to which I helped off the non-productive discussions, I apologize. I don't know whether we're there or not. We're going to find out tonight. Who knows how it's going to go. But I hope we all will approach this discussion in the spirit of the president who we just saw inaugurated and not the one shown the door. So those are my hopes. The question I have for Lisa, I guess, is that you drafted a spectacular, detailed resolution establishing the standing committee. Does the language that you just recited simply, is that the sum total of the language, or do the agreements that we came to in all of our discussions in this document that you produced, do these still apply? Are they going to be?
We are simply voting on the approval of the standing committee in terms of the limitations within the motion as originally recommended by the committee. So that separate resolution will be discussed and voted upon later in the meeting if we get to it today. So
Okay.
that resolution will still be introduced as a resolution for the framework of the standing committee.
Can I ask, is there a reason why we want to put that off? Because if there's anything we seem to have agreed to, it's Lisa's carefully drafted resolution. Can we not?
Sure.
Wanted-
What I would suggest is that we deal with Lisa's motion, and then we immediately take up a motion to establish the parameters, essentially, of the standing committee.
Okay.
And that's done within the context of the bylaws that we adopted at our January 11th meeting. So yeah, I think that would be perfectly fine. I think the reason why Lisa was considering taking it up later is that there will be some of the other recommendations that will come within the purview of that standing committee, and that we want to make sure that, but no, adopting it now would be perfectly fine, I think. And John?
One question. Lisa, the proposal has a number of bullets describing what the committee will do. Is that considered the current mission statement, or will there be a separate mission statement that will come along after this?
There would be a separate mission statement drafted by the committee and presented to the commission for approval.
Okay, so we'll have an opportunity to discuss that.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
But
Peter?
just so I understand, John's question is in reference to this further document. So all we're voting on now is essentially the language as amended in the sentence, established an ongoing task force on racial and equity as
Correct.
Okay. So I don't know about others, but I'm perfectly happy to act on this now.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, shall we have a vote? Okay, there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise their hand. 7-0. Okay, Lisa, you want to go on to the, well, I should have allowed Michael to speak if he wanted to. But
Oh, did
first,
Michael?
yeah, Michael has his hand up. Michael, not Michael Zeldin, Michael Gibbons.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
No, I didn't see that either.
How can
Maybe
you?
Put his hand back down?
He did.
Okay.
Michael, do you still want to talk? If you want to, raise your hand.
No,
Okay,
thank you.
no thanks. All right. Okay, Lisa, you want to proceed to the next, your next motion?
Number 2.
Well, no, I was thinking if we're going to go ahead and do the resolution on the committee.
Okay, let me find it. Hold on.
Excuse me, Randy, I'm having some Wi-Fi trouble, so I'm going to try to connect again while
Okay.
she's looking for the document, if you don't mind.
Okay,
So the second item that we're going to discuss under this committee is the resolution for the establishment of the standing committee. So establishment of the Racial and Social Equity Standing Committee. And I prepared the resolution, which basically gives an overview of our newly adopted bylaws, which allow us to establish a standing committee and some of the rules contained within. Definition of equity. The commission basically historically addressing issues of racial and social equity with past resolutions and letters, including going back to 2019 resolution on Oxford House leases, and 2019 as well, supporting Mayor Bowser's statement on President Trump's threat to arrest and remove immigrant residents. Then we also discussed in the resolution the task force on racism and the framework, the committees that we formed in the resolutions, and some of the committees or recommendations that supported the establishment of a permanent framework. And we also addressed in the resolution the inequity in terms of a historical and continual in nature. And then in terms of the resolution, the resolution asks that the standing committee be established, that the committee shall study and advise the commission on how to most effectively implement initiatives developed by the commission's task force on racism and adopted by the commission, advocate for racial and social equity, promote community involvement and engagement, and basically champion education and training and value data analysis. We recommend that the current task force, because the work has been completed, is basically sunset. So it's basically resolved and dissolved at this point, and that the new Racial and Social Equity Standing Committee take over that work. The resolution also recommends that the commission appoint 2 chairs. I had inserted myself, and I think Randy Speck also for the 2 co-chair recommendations. Obviously, we can talk about that. And then the remaining portion of the resolution kind of mirrors the language that's in our newly adopted bylaws regarding commission responsibilities. So with that, I move that the commission adopt the resolution for establishment of the Racial and Social Equity Standing Committee.
Second.
Okay. It's been a motion and a second. Peter, you want to start the discussion again?
I just would like to start by asking, just to clarify, under the first resolved, under the first bullet, all of the activities, implement, advocate, and so forth, are all things that the standing committee will advise the commission on, and at least the formal actor with these bullets below that is the commission. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I want to really thank Lisa for doing a fantastic job of drafting this resolution, and particularly because she prepared the bylaws. She was intimately familiar with those requirements, particularly for the provisions that we added to the bylaws about standing committees. So I think this is a perfectly appropriate step for the commission to take. So I'm enthusiastically supporting it. John?
Yeah, I guess to reinforce Peter's comment, in the section where it says further resolve, those sentences more or less reinforce Peter's comment about the advisory nature of this committee as its fundamental purpose.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
That's okay.
Lisa, there's a question in the Q&A if you want to address that.
So the question in the Q&A is, where is this document that represents the framework and specifics about the standing committee? Does the document include specifics about how the standing committee would operate? If so, will the standing committee be able to amend when we decide some aspects of how we operate? So to answer there's a few questions in there. Just to start off with the first one, the draft resolution is circulated to the members of the commission. So right now it's not a public document. It will be a public document once we adopt it and it's edited and the commission is satisfied with it. There are some specifics in there regarding how the committee would operate. And a lot of that is framed by, we're kind of bound by in some instance, DC code and the operating procedures for the committee, which are found in some sections of DC code. We do have some best practices in there that I would call, but it really does put, I think the committee framework is definitely different than what the ANC had in the past. So it will probably take all of us a little bit of getting used to. But I think we do have to remember that there is legislation out there that frames how standing committees are to operate within the ANC, and we really cannot get around that. So that was placed in the bylaws, and I carried that forward over to the standing committee because that was something that is, and I think you can hear from Commissioner Higgins and Commissioner Gosselin, it's really important for the commission to understand the role of the standing committee and the standing committee to understand the role of the commission. And this language kind of does that. And one of the key things is what Commissioner Higgins pointed out is committees are advisory to the commission. So they're definitely are bound by some operating procedures. Where the flexibility comes in, and Commissioner Higgins also touched upon this, is to develop, the committee does have the right to develop how it operates internally. So if they will have officers, you don't have to have officers, but there might be an instance where you might want officers. But district law says that those officers have to be similar to the officers that exist within the commission. So that's kind of the push and pull that you will see that comes into play with working with the committees. So the mission statement, Commissioner Higgins brought that up. The committee does have a right to develop its mission statement, but the commission will review that and bless that. And that's important for that to occur. So there is flexibility in terms of how the committee can structure itself. The committee has a right to establish its own subcommittees. If it wants to do that, maybe the standing committee just wants to be a one body standing committee. Maybe it wants to develop one subcommittee. So there is flexibility in doing that. So hopefully, Cal, that answers your question. And I know you have, sent some emails around on that. Definitely my apologies for not getting back in touch with you in advance. But hopefully that kind of explains how that operates.
There was another question, a follow on, Lisa.
Okay. So Cal's question is, so with that flexibility, could we decide, for example, what our decision-making process can be? District law kind of bound you to majority rule and no proxy voting. So, which is the same thing that occurs in the commission. And that's something that we can't change.
I would also emphasize the bylaws. We also have to operate within the context of our bylaws that we adopted at our January 11th meeting, which are consistent again with the statute. Our bylaws are available on the website under the heading About, the drop-down menu there, and it has the bylaws. So if you want to take a look at the bylaws, that will help you understand the role of the committee as well, because it's spelled out in quite a lot of detail there.
Yeah.
I'm including it in the chat, everyone, so that people have it.
Great. Thanks,
you,
Connie. Okay, any other comments or questions? Anyone from the audience want to comment? Okay, we'll take a vote then on Lisa's motion that has been seconded to adopt the resolution on the Standing Committee on Equity. All those in favor, raise your hand. 7-0. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Lisa, you want to go to the next one?
Okay. So the next recommendation that the community working group had was to develop a racial response network. And I'll discuss this during the discussion part. I want to get the motion on the floor. So I move that the commission adopt the community working group recommendation number 2, develop a racial response network as amended. So I'm inserting a friendly amendment by striking the language develop and replacing it with the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to create, and inserting after a racial response network, the language and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration. So the entire amendment reads, the commission tasks the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to create a racial response network and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration. Is there a second?
Second.
Connie, thank you.
Okay. Discussion? Chris?
Yeah, I just want, I think the idea of a racial response network is a great idea, but I really worry that non-professionals such as commissioners and others like on this thing could get into a lot of trouble. I mean, you know, if an action went bad for one reason or another, you know, you could get sued or you could cause harm to people. I mean, that's why architects have licenses, and that's why social workers are registered and people like that. So I really think a racial response network needs to be composed of professionals, and there needs to be consideration to the legal issues.
Peter?
As the commissioners know, I have some of the same concerns as Commissioner Stromboludi. And I'd ask whether you would consider a friendly amendment to insert after, before develop a phrase that reads, comma, examine concerns raised by the working group itself and perhaps others that emerge as the investigation continues and it is the examination continues, and develop an implementation plan for further, and then pick up and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration. Let me say 2 things about this. One is I want the public that's attending to understand that it was decided that we would handle all the resolutions other than Lisa's on the Standing Committee differently than we handled Lisa's on the Standing Committee. Now, we may be at a point where we've come to a reasonable way to handle the issues that are between us on this. This and a couple other resolutions are ones where I'm not sure we're quite there. So I say that for 2 reasons. This is one of the 3 or maybe 4 that I hope we can come to compromise on. And the other thing I'd say is that the issues that Chris raises were raised by the working group itself, particularly the liability issue. And I do think that we need to be clear about that being an important consideration as we move forward. So I ask that be a friendly amendment. If it's not, I move it as an amendment and we can vote on it. But who is the author?
I am.
Peter, can you say your words again? What phrase are you exactly adding to that?
So bear with me because we didn't try to work out drafts ahead of time in our meeting, our conversations. So what Lisa said, the thing that's now on the floor reads, the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to create a racial response network. And then there's a phrase that continues. And what I would say is at that point, stop and add comma, examine concerns, comma, including liability concerns, comma, that were raised by the working group itself and perhaps others that emerge during the course of the committee's work, let's say, comma, and develop an implementation plan for further, and then go back to the rest of the language that is that Lisa just read. Does
Okay,
that,
Peter, say that one more time, all the way through, no hesitation, so that we have all your words. I just want all
Can
your
you-
words.
Peter, can
Sorry.
you put it in the chat? And I
Yeah, just
I'm
type
making it up as I go along, but you
Okay.
know.
Type
Can
it
you
in.
look in the chat? I just offered, I have concerns about the language that's used in the recommendations, and I want that language to be as positive as possible while at the same time conveying our points. So I'm offering maybe some additional language in the chat where we say in terms of implementation, because to me, your language
I
is
understand.
part of our implementation plan.
I understand. So let me just, if everybody's seeing this, so you would add this as a second sentence to the language in the friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so the second sentence would read, the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to create a racial response network and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration. And this is Lisa's language. In doing so, the Standing Committee will take into full consideration resources, benefits, risks, and community engagement and feedback in its final recommendations to the commission. I find that acceptable. So, I mean, I don't know about the others who have concern about this. I understand that's incrementally more positive from the ANC website. The ANC does not have standing committees. I don't know what that means. Okay.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I
Mike.
share Peter's concern and also Chris's concern. So I would support these modifications that have been presented. Especially what Chris is saying, we have to examine this extremely carefully, I think, not only from I think a legal standpoint, but even just a prudential standpoint as to whether this is an appropriate thing to do, even though we might get sort of legal clearance on. So anyway, I'm very cautious about this. I support these amendments, which I think address my cautions.
Okay. Michael?
Yeah, so I don't think any of these amendments are necessary. I think that as originally established, the recommendation says it shall study the recommendation to create a racial task force and develop an implementation plan. It seems to me subsumed within the study the recommendation and develop an implementation plan that it is understood that within that activity, such things as legal liability, connecting this racial response network to the 311, 911 system, it's axiomatic. What else would a study and implementation plan do if not take those things into consideration? So to me, the danger here, I mean, it's not that I have any problems specifically with the language Peter has proposed or even Lisa that you proposed, but I think as we go through this report, if we're putting in, if the recommendation is to study and develop a plan, now we're starting putting in these things like say, yeah, but in your study, make sure you think about this, or in your implementation plan, make sure you think about that. Then we're really essentially starting the work of the committee whose job it is to do exactly this. So I would personally prefer that these recommendations be clean recommendations, which is that we're going to do something affirmative, we're going to contact the mayor's office with respect to something, or we're going to delegate to the committee whose task then is to study and develop an implementation plan, which they will bring back to the commission for its further evaluation. And if in that study and implementation exercise, the study doesn't include such things as legal liability, then I think the commission would say, sorry, this is not a good implementation plan
Go back.
because you failed to consider the 311. So I'm just afraid that if we go through this process on each of these recommendations, adding these little caveats, indicators to the committee, what it should and shouldn't think about, dilutes what the purpose of the recommendation is, which is to send it to the committee, have them study it, give us a plan back, then we'll look at the plan. And in that plan, we'll make these suggestions, we'll accept or reject the suggestions. So anyway, I'm happy with it as it is. I think adding your language, Lisa, or your language, Peter, doesn't further the needs of the report or this recommendation. So that's my 2 cents.
Before I, commissioners, it would be definitely helpful if you use the raise your hand thing. I know 3 of you have it up there, so I appreciate that. It helps me to see who needs to go. But just to kind of give you guys some insight, when the committee came up with this recommendation, we absolutely knew that, one of the things that was so great about being on this group is that we did not have the constraints of worrying about implementation with coming up with ideas. So we looked at how we wanted to envision this community in the future, which really freed us up to come up with great recommendations that other people hadn't thought of before. And this was one of those. But in doing that and making the recommendation to the ANC, we took into account that we had not done the implementation work. And if you look at the attachment that goes along with this recommendation, we pretty much bring up all the things that we said, well, this is really great. We love to be able to implement that. But what about the liability? I brought up from my past experience, sometimes, what happens if you do report something wrong? So we took into account all those things and we kind of parked it in a parking lot to say, when we come back and work on the implementation process, these are all the things that we know we have to cover. So I definitely agree with Michael, and, because this is a new commission and new commissioners who are not familiar with the process and the steps that we went through as community working groups, I do understand and I do believe that extra language gives some comfort. Whether the language is there or not, I was there and I'm here on the commission, and I know all the things that, going forward as a standing committee that we have to do. And Commissioner Higgins brought up a point that I in my previous position, we always got legal opinions on stuff. So, there's a lot of things that we have to do to iron this out. I just want to provide the commissioner some comfort of whether or not the language is in there or not. That, from my perspective, when I say implementation and I'm used to implementing huge major projects, I mean a full implementation plan that covers your resources, your risk, budget, personnel, all those type of things that we would bring to you guys to make sure that you have a clear understanding of everything that it takes to do this project. And sometimes that answer is because of all the things that it takes to do this project, we might recommend maybe we shouldn't do it, or maybe we should pass it on. So just keep that in mind, especially on a community group. We looked at these as things that we really want to do, but we also understand that we have some work to do when it comes to implementing and researching the viability of some of our recommendations. So with that, Connie.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I was just going to say that I am in full agreement with Michael's statement, because I do think, and especially what you just said, Lisa, is that we don't want to constrain a committee to do its work. I mean, the whole point of having a committee and then making sure that the composition of that committee contains experts and people who know, is that the community is bringing their own experience. You know, the community that we live in, there's a lot of people who have experience at work professionally, also in their volunteer life, and they may come with ideas on how to implement. And it could even be that it's not for the commission to implement. It could be that they give the commission advice for some other part of the district to do it. So we don't know what they're going to come up with. And I think that I am in agreement that everything that is going to be studied by this committee, they're going to look at the full scope of what does that mean in terms of risks and benefits and cautionary aspects of it. So thank you for that. I just wanted to convey my support.
Thank you, Connie. Chris?
Yeah,
Commissioner Fromboludi.
you can call me Chris. That's fine. Anyway, I still think that it's important that we have the language that you put in there, just because it makes it plain to other people who are from the outside. Who, you know, I think it's good. I mean, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't limit what you can do. It's just something that the other commissioners thought it might be a good idea to put in. And I don't see any. I think there's no negatives to put it in there, and I see a number of positives. So.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gosselin.
I want to respond. I understand what you are saying and what Commissioner Zeldin is saying. I want to respond to Commissioner Zeldin. I think if you read the community group's report in this area, they are very clear that there is nothing axiomatic about this idea. I mean, this is new. This is new terrain, and it needs to be explored. So that I'm not sure it's clear. Perhaps it's clear to Commissioner Gore, having operated in a huge federal agency and at a very high level, what implementation means, but that doesn't mean that there's a standard meaning of the word. But if the concern that we are gomming it up is sufficiently, weighs sufficiently on the commissioners, I have a suggestion, which is we go back to the bald language of the headliner, develop a racial response network, and modify it to say, consider developing a racial response network, period, end. Wide open. I mean, if you want to do that, let's do that. But I mean, one of the things that troubles me about the language as it is amended is that we start down the path to adding, what we want done. And my proposal was just that, and the language that Lisa suggested in the chat, both sort of took us a little further down that road. So if there's some upset about, gomming it up, then let's go back to our really bald statement. And the only reason I'd say consider is I don't want it presumed that we're going to go the route of fully developing it. So, I mean, I don't know, Michael, if that, which way you want to go on that one.
Well, it's not up to me, but I still think, as written, the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial Equality to study. I mean, you could add, if you want to study the advisability of the creation of a racial response network, and if feasible, develop. I mean, so. But to me, again, that maybe because my experience is like Connie's, that like Lisa's rather, that's assumed that if you're being tasked to study something, you study all aspects of it. I mean, that's what I thought was axiomatic, was that when you study something, you study it in its, full, with its full components. But I mean, if you wanted to add, if it makes people feel more comfortable and they wanted to study the advisability of the creation of, I mean, that's fine. All I know is that at the rate we're going, we're going to have very few things that we accomplish this evening.
Connie, then back to Peter.
Thank you, Lisa. To camp on to what Commissioner Fromboludi said, I think maybe the right recommendation might be to put language in the standing committee resolution rather than to gum up each recommendation, because that's for the whole standing committee for every recommendation that we make. And to put that there so that we're clearer in our language.
And that's where I actually grabbed that from.
Oh, that's perfect. Then I think if it's in that language, that's the framework language. That's the framework
I
language.
would
And I think
prefer
that
to
that's,
do that.
yeah, that's perfect, because otherwise for every recommendation that we're going to go through, we're going to add all these words when really it is the intention, you know, it's the working relationship and our expectations of the committee. To put that in there, I think would be better in that framework document.
Peter?
As all the commissioners know, I have said that for several of us, there are a very few of these recommendations for which we have a fairly substantial amount of concern. I identified this as one of them. So to Commissioner Zeldin's point that we'll be here until hell freezes over, I don't think so. If we establish between us a reasonable working relationship and you understand the concerns that some of us have expressed about this one over the course of this exchange. So I would hope that we could move on now by accepting, and I'm open-minded about this. My language, Commissioner Gore's language, additional language, Commissioner Zeldin's, but accept this as a friendly amendment, get some language done, and let's move on. I can promise you there are a couple others where I'm going to do this. And I may get shot down or may not get shot down, but I mean, I've identified clearly what are the areas of concern, and this was one of them. So I asked my fellow commissioners to take that into account. And again, I'm agnostic about the three of us, what language we amend the amendment with.
Randy?
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in and suggest that we do go ahead and take a vote as soon as possible, because I think we've heard everybody's point of view, but I would go with what Lisa accepted as a friendly amendment, the language that she put in the chat. It may be belt and suspenders. I think I agree with you, Michael, that it is. But I think if it gives the commissioners greater comfort, that's a valuable thing to do. And it is, I think, helpful to let the community know what the commission's thinking is on this one.
And we also have two questions in the Q&A, but Connie, did you want to comment?
That was my, there's two questions in the Q&A and also a suggestion via chat from Michael Gibbons.
I saw
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So one of the question is maybe a comment from Cal. If this helps to clarify, the Racial Response Network could direct traffic to organizations or professionals as needed. The main impetus for this is to provide support for residents feeling welcome in the neighborhood because there hasn't been a community-based response when an incident happens, contributing to at least one family moving out. And that is definitely true. And then from Bill and Marie Hoffman, I would find it helpful to have some examples of racial response actions and who would comprise the network members. So that would be one of the things that we would be looking at in the implementation stage. And there are we actually researched other racial response networks and did not find any. There are some response networks geared towards LGBTQ, the immigrant community, mainly those two, and also higher education. So in college campuses, they have response networks, but we really didn't find any that are kind of the idea like we have of a true racial response network. So that's what's so kind of groundbreaking about it. So Randy, given that, you want to call for the vote?
But wait 1 second,
Wait.
there's Michael Gibbons is in the chat. He said for every subgroup rec, we could add the word study, comma, consider adopting and develop action plan 2. So perhaps there's other language. I know that Randy has said that he's fine with your language, Lisa.
I'm gonna accept the friendly amendment of my language.
Good. All right.
Okay, yeah, I think we should take a vote.
Okay, so that, just to recap that motion, the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to create a racial response network and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration. In doing so, the Standing Committee will take into full consideration resources, benefits, risk, and community engagement and feedback in its final recommendations to the commission.
Okay, all those in favor? 7-0. Okay,
Okay. Recommendation number 3 is to basically create a website to share information and resources to include, what's going on with the permanent standing committee and racial awareness and inclusion resources. So I move that the commission adopt community working group recommendation number 3, create a website to share information and resources. Is there a second? Yeah,
Second.
thank you.
Are we gonna have discussion?
any other discussion? Sure. Anybody have anything? Okay, shall we have a vote? The motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? 7-0, okay.
Recommendation number 4, I think this one will go quick too, is foster partnerships with other organizations. So we basically talked about being involved with other, racial and social justice organizations within our ward and external wards and within the city at large. So I move that the commission adopt community working group recommendation number 4, foster partnerships with other organizations. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, John, thank you. Any discussion?
I have one
Michael?
question. When the recommendation is as broad as foster partnerships with other organizations, whose task is that? Are all these tasks, I know there was a discussion about this earlier, but are all these tasks going to the new committee that's being set up, or are some of these tasks that should stay within the ANC? I know Chris wants everything to go to the committee. He's made that clear, but is that, do we have consensus that that's the case, that everything that we are recommending here is just going over to this committee? And if it is, how is the committee going to accomplish all of these things? I mean, it would have to be a gigantic committee. This is a lot of work. I mean, that's my question.
Peter?
I think, Commissioner Zeldin, it's the exact opposite, that at least the formal actor, and then Commissioner Fromboludi will disagree, but the formal actor here is the commission. We may be advised by the standing committee, but the formal actor is the commission. And of all the recommendations, of all the things that are on this list of almost 30 to 20, more than 20 recommendations, fostering partnerships with organizations, many of which we already have partnerships with or relationships with, seems to me to be the lightest load you can see. Now, some of these other ones are going to be a big load, and how we apportion that work, I don't know. But one of the reasons I asked the questions about the standing committee resolution is I want to make sure that the standing committee is advising, and that's it.
Well, Peter, I'm not suggesting that the commission is not the ultimate actor. That seems clear, that the new committee advises the commission and the commission ultimately acts. So that to me is clear. I'm talking about who's going to do this work. When when we are assigning things like create a website or develop a racial response network or foster partnerships, my question was not the final adoption of whatever it may be, but the arms and legs of doing this. Is it the understanding of the 7 of us that everything here is going to this committee, and then this committee is going to have to build itself out into an enormous organization with lots of subcommittees and working groups to tackle, because each of these things could have its own little work group, and then come back to us and we'll say yay or nay after they do all the work, or is some of the work staying with us? That's the only question I'm asking as a threshold matter, not who the ultimate actor is. I agree with you, Peter, that ultimately this is the act of the commission being advised by the committee. I'm just asking who's going to do all this work.
Fromboludi.
Yeah, this has been my worry about all the recommendations that are being made. I mean, they're all great recommendations, but who's going to be doing all the work? I'm assuming it's going to be the committee that does the work, even though the committee is not just the commissioner members. The committees could be a whole bunch of people from the community, which if the commission itself, just the 7 of us were going to do this work, we would be working 80 hours a week. I mean, it'd be impossible. So that's my assumption. And that's the only way I'll support this stuff, these things, is if it's the committee that's going to do it. Now, they don't have to do all this stuff all at once. They can say, I'm going to do item 2, and then I'm going to do item 4, and I'm going to do, they're going to come out. I mean, with a schedule like this, I think they're going to have to come up with some kind of modus operandi. And I know Commissioner Gore is excellent at that. So that's what she used to do. And I used to do that too. I was a project manager. So that's what I would expect.
No, I agree. Commissioner Higgins?
Yeah, I mean, I share Michael's concern about this and resources and so forth, but if we're going through an exercise in fairly detailed organization about the committee. If we splinter the task between the commission and the committee, then we're going to have a coordination issue between the commission and the committee. I think the whole program would be much more coherent if it is within one organization. We have to be a little bit careful about resources, but I think that would just complicate it even more rather than simplify it.
It's fine. I'm just asking the question. Look, we've been together as a commission for 23 days, and
Seems longer.
we've had
Longer than that.
tackling issues that, as each of us has been working 20 and 30 hours a week on Lafayette and on the task force, and now we've got the upcoming DDOT stuff. So I'm not unmindful of the amount of work. I'm just wondering if this committee is going to be, an enormous, standing up a committee, getting people to serve on the committee, is going to be an enormous undertaking, which is why in some sense I asked in one of my early notes is, Lisa, I think you said that the committee shall be chaired by 2 existing commission members. And I'm thinking that's a big time to be a commissioner doing all the stuff that's keeping us so busy now, and then be in charge of this, what could be an enormous organization. I'm just worried about who's going to have the bandwidth to do that. As superhuman as you've been, Lisa, so far in the 23 days that we've been working together, I just want to make sure that we're not biting off more than we can chew, or if there's a way that things are prioritized, or, as I said, I think there are certain things that the commission can do that could lighten the load of the committee. I mean, since the ultimate actor is the commission, I don't understand this bifurcation thing. Ultimately, everything is coming back to the commission. So why can't some things stay with the commission to begin with? Why does that mean bifurcation if ultimately everything comes back to us to begin with? Anyway, I'm just worried about you, Lisa. How is it that you are going to manage to do all of this stuff while we're just sitting around worrying about potholes?
I'll get it. Peter?
Well, I sympathize with this worry, but I guess the question here, and it could be asked again and again and again as we roll through these recommendations, is should we then vote no? Is that would someone advocate for that? I mean, I'm not. This task force worked for 4 months on this thing. They're saying these are things that we should consider, and I mean, maybe we should vote no on some of them just to lighten the load. But which ones do you think? So I don't. I mean, I understand the worry. Are we going to do anything about it, or are we not and going to see how it plays out? Which is, I guess, what I would advocate.
Randy, then Commissioner Higgins.
I sympathize with the concerns for the workload that the committee will have, but the committee is going to be able to control its own priorities. And as Lisa said, the committee can decide, we're going to take in the first month, this is the only thing we're going to focus on, one recommendation, and we'll have 2 meetings on that, and that'll be it. They may spread this out over a year or 2 years even.
Right.
And I think that will work. And I've agreed that I would co-chair with Lisa on that. And so I'll be pitching in as well. And there are a lot of people in the community who are very industrious and committed and willing to help out. And so I think that will work. Now, I might point out one other thing too, and that there are some of the recommendations, I know particularly in the housing area, that the recommendation was for the commission to do something specific, like advise the Office of Planning about something. And those things I think are for the commission, and not everything is going to go to the committee, and the commission needs to address some of them directly, I think. So, and we'll get to those.
Right. That's right. That's why I raised it, Randy.
Thank you, Michael.
Commissioner Higgins?
Well, I just basically, I was going to make the same point as Randy did. I think, there'll be some shakeout. Hopefully the committee will have set some priorities, maybe in the first stages, go after the low hanging fruit, just to get its legs and to get some confidence. So, we're looking at an awful lot of stuff right now in one big chunk, but they'll be addressing things, according to the resources that they have. So I'm trusting that the managerial capabilities of the chairs will prevail, and it'll be manageable.
Commissioner Shane?
Yes, I'm going to agree. And then I'm also going to make a few points, which is that we all as commissioners, Michael's point about we're all so busy. Seriously, the last 23 days seems like more than 23 days. It's like 23 times 4. I don't know. We've done a lot of work, I think, partly because we are new and we're learning. And also we've had big issues before us. So that's been hard. But each of us has to decide what matters most and which issue we're going to take on that matters most to our constituents and to ourselves. And so that's how we're going to pair the work across all of 7 of us. We have to, and we're going to have to pitch in when we can. So the other point I wanted to make is we do have to rely on the leadership and the members of the committee. In that framework, we've said they could decide to set up subcommittees. They can decide how they want to do the work. They can decide on prioritization with us too, right? Like something might be urgent in our mind because something's coming down the pike. We might say, can you work on this piece now? Because we see some movement here. We would like, your recommendations, your feedback, your research. I think we'll have to work through those things, but I think the standing committee forming it tasking them with, accepting all the great work that the work groups have done, we will figure out that way. And if we can't, we'll have to find community members that are retired, have time, want to put effort in, who are experts, who can do this like this. Whereas for us, we'd have to study it, like get a master's degree. Others, they've been doing this their entire lives. They could help us. And that's what we have to do, is figure that part out, is how do we recruit people to this effort, and in a systematic way, so that we're not all drowning in work.
Can I move the question? Yeah, just,
Yes. Okay, I don't think there were any amendments to your proposed motion. Okay, all those in favor of adopting the motion, raise your hand. 7-0, okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Peter.
All right, you guys, we're
cooking.
Okay, number 5. I move that the commission adopt community working group recommendation number 5, propose community surveys questions as amended, by inserting the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to, before the language proposed community survey questions, and inserting and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration after proposed community survey questions. So the full amended recommendation reads, the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to propose community survey questions and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John.
Oh, sorry.
So just a little feedback on this one. This recommendation, when we were going through some of the discussion, we definitely kind of said to ourselves, we asked ourselves, what is the baseline for this problem? And we don't have a baseline. So we don't know how many racial incidents there are out there. We have definitely examples of issues that have happened in the community recently and in the past. So we thought that it would be a good idea just to feel and see what is happening out there and come up with some survey questions to help us do that, and also help us engage the community in other areas too. So there are quite a few different areas that we thought of developing survey questions in. So that is what this recommendation is kind of all about, kind of figuring out that baseline of several areas within this topic. Peter, you had a question.
Actually, I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. And it's we definitely have seen that we can do that really quickly, because we pulled off the Lafayette survey. We were talking about the DDOT survey. So given time, I think the Standing Committee could really develop a really good instrument, in conjunction with us as a commission, and see what our residents respond to, what their needs are. And that will definitely help us set priorities, because sometimes we think we know what the issues are, but until we really ask our community and see what their feedback is, we don't have a full understanding. Any discussion?
Move the question.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. 7-0, okay. Thank you, Lisa.
Number 6, I move that the commission adopt community working group number 6, create community center space for events and activities, as amended by inserting the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to, before, create community center space for events and activities, and inserting supporting racial equity and inclusion, and develop an implementation plan for further commission consideration in collaboration with the small area plan team after create community center space for events and activities. So that amendment would read, the commission tasked the Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity to study the recommendation to create community center space for events and activities supporting racial equity and inclusion, and develop an implementation plan for further consideration in collaboration with the small area plan team. And that language was kind of developed from some of the recommendations that went around the commission recently to kind of connect the two teams. And I know there's probably going to be some good discussion on this one. So I'm not sure who had their hand up first, either Peter or Commissioner Frambaluti. Commissioner Frambaluti.
Only Chris.
Oh, is there a second on the motion? I'm sorry. Peter? Okay, thank you.
Feel free to call me Chris. Frambaluti's off the wall.
It's a handful.
The reason I don't support this is, you know, I was in the chair of the committee that helped program the community center when we were developing a project, and to have a space. I mean, there are a lot of people that want their own space, and the building is just not big enough to have dedicated spaces for every group that wants one. As a matter of fact, the ANC was only able to get the tiny little interior office. I think it was a janitor's closet at one time. That space costs $600 a square foot to build. That was the price that DPR gave for the community center. So it's really, I think what we should do is you know, we're going to have a bunch of meeting rooms which are able, and classrooms which are able to be reserved by different groups who are interested in it. And you know, I suppose, you know, we could take over one of them and decorate it the way we wanted it, or do whatever we wanted to. But I think to have a space reserved just for one group is a mistake. I think you know, once the group determines what their activities wants to be, you know, the ANC does have a priority in reserving rooms, and we could reserve at the beginning of the year. We could reserve, you know, our room for 10 times or whatever. So I'm not in favor of this. I think it's too expensive, and then it's going to set precedents for all the other groups in the community to get their own rooms also.
Peter, then Randy.
So I think that using the community center to maximum purpose is a good thing, including for this purpose. I share Chris's concerns, particularly in this period of transition when we may or may not use the existing center for many months or a year, when we may rebuild the whole thing over the next several years. Making commitments now, I worry about. I want to raise, I don't want to get into a big fight about it, but I want to raise a question in relation, using this as an example. My understanding of what we're doing when we are voting to accept the language that you, Commissioner Gore, are presenting is we are accepting that language. We are not, somebody in the exchange of a few minutes ago said that, you know, we're going to bring all these, the task force activities. In the task force report on this, they talked about a dedicated center. I do not consider myself to be, in voting for this language, to be voting for that that proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, I'm taking my hand down.
Randy, then John.
Yeah, I sympathize with what Chris is saying. And I didn't really understand this to mean that they were going to have a room that was theirs and theirs alone, or ours and ours alone, just for this sole purpose. That probably is not the best use of the space. I was thinking more in terms of something like a bulletin board, a space that where these kinds of activities and these kinds of issues could be posted, and people could go there and immediately find out everything there is to know about what's going on with the committee and the commission's activities in this regard. I don't think, I mean, they'll obviously be able to reserve space in the building for meetings and for events and all of those kinds of things, just like everybody else does. But I didn't envision that they would have a separate space, like seniors, for instance. It's a little bit different for seniors, where they do need an activity place dedicated to them, and we had that in the proposal we did for the community center. So that was my understanding of this, and maybe it needs to be clarified in some way. But I don't think having a separate room is that's probably not going to fly ultimately.
John?
Yeah, I did not see this as anything related to a permanent space. I see it more in terms of maybe, taking turns with other community organizations for a lobby exhibit or something of that nature. It could be that modest. Eventually, the Parks and Recreation is going to rule on this anyway, but I don't see it as a super expensive or long-term permanent arrangement. Just people travel through there just like they travel through the library. And if they're going to some place and they see an exhibit in the lobby, well, that suffices to raise public awareness. So it could be, as I said, kind of modest and still be helpful.
Chris?
Yeah, I hate to belabor this. And,
Yeah.
as an architect, when somebody says, the title of this thing is Create Community Center Space for Events and Activities. I mean, that to me is a separate space. It's not a bulletin board. So, maybe you could title the title here, Create Community Center, community center wall, or a community center display, maybe that, a community center display for events and activities would be more realistic. But once you say space is area, and most people would think of space as a room. So that's the way I read it. So, and you guys are all, you're all reporters and English professionals. I mean, I'm surprised that you interpret it so loosely.
Okay,
Wow. Randy? Then Connie? Randy on mute.
Yeah, I was just starting to put something in the chat, but I'll just read it now. What I would suggest is a friendly amendment. A recommendation to create and then add in there an opportunity in the community center, and then strike space and put in to publicize and hold events and activities supporting.
fine.
Say it again or write it down.
It would read, after recommendation to create, add an opportunity in the community center to publicize and hold events and activities supporting racial equity.
Well, is there, I don't know how the community center has operated, but is there not, let's say the community center was operational now pre-pandemic, and I wanted to advertise an activity that fell within the topic that we're talking about. Do I not have an opportunity? Do I not already have an opportunity to do that? I mean, is there only certain things or groups or that have opportunity? I thought I would expect in the community center, everyone has an opportunity to do this. I just wonder about, it sounds as if, we need this because those opportunities have been denied in the past, and therefore we wanted to make sure that there's a recommendation that they'd be given an opportunity, equal opportunity now, which was not previously. That's, for me, that word
Well, instead
a bit confusing.
Instead of create, how about ensure? To ensure an opportunity in the community center.
Michael, just to answer your question. So the community center has an office, and if you want to, the bulletin board, if you want to post something on the bulletin board, you go to the office and ask permission. If you wanted to reserve a room, a meeting room or a classroom, you would go to the office and ask permission, and they would look at a schedule and fit you in. And then there are also some organizations, like there was a daycare a little kindergarten in the nursery school. That's what it is, a nursery school, and there's some classes. So they would schedule a room for every Tuesday for a year. So, I mean, but it's all scheduled. So anybody can go there and do things like that. And it's always space. I mean, it's never completely used.
Right. So the reason I asked that is because as I read this, the implication of the recommendation was, though the word is not in the recommendation, the implication for me as I read this was dedicated. That the word, that this implied dedicated space, which I think is what gave rise, Chris, to your initial objection. Now we've all said it's not dedicated space, it's just an opportunity to post events and activities and through the normal processes, reserve a space. And so if that's what this is, if it's not dedicated, then I'm not sure why there is a need for this recommendation.
Let me
What is it
clarify that.
accomplishing? So Lisa, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying, tell me, if it's not dedicated, tell me what was the working group's thought process?
So the working group's thought process was for some form of dedicated space. They really did want somewhere within the community center dedicated to racial justice and inclusion. And part of that was not just necessarily somewhere to go meet that would be a comfortable, safe place to meet and have those discussions, but we also talked about artwork, walking into the community center and the art reflecting a diversity or a diversified community. So that would require, hopefully space within a community center that we could dedicate to that. So it was actually a combination of things. I wouldn't probably sum it up by saying dedicated space, but it was a multitude of things to definitely have a safe place to go, but also to have space within a community center where information could be shared, where maybe artwork could be displayed that, reflects a diverse community. So that's why I kind of kept the language, of study the recommendation, because and I do think we could maybe change that core sentence, create community center space for events and activities, to maybe reflect a little bit more of what it really is. But I do think the recommendation is worth studying, and definitely studying within a small area team as the community center comes under renovation. Connie, you're on mute. Sorry.
My understanding of this recommendation was to kind of raise attention. It's raised attention of this issue, and what better place to raise attention than the community center where the community gathers. I mean, that was, I believe, and in the language it says, we recommend, in the report that is I'm reading, we would like to see spaces in the new center specifically set aside for such uses, which would be, how this community center can play a central role in furthering diversity and inclusion in our neighborhood. And also an example provided was, can be used to promote social interaction, education, workshops, seminars, cultural and artistic activities, local business events, and other events to support racial equity and inclusion. We recommend a dedicated, safe, and neutral space within the center as a hub to host and organize these activities. And so I do think it was meant for that, was a place where people can go and feel it's okay to view the artwork, to pick up literature, to understand why we might change the name of the Newlands, fountain. That kind of that ability to both share with the broader community that we believe in this, but also for the community to be able to gather in a space where it is safe. Now, of course, Chris has brought up the point, each of these rooms cost a lot. So to me, the operative word is space. What do we mean by space? And maybe we can amend the language so that so that the committee can come up with what that actually means. And I'm not sure how to do that, but from the beginning, I think space is the issue here. You know, is it a room? I never really regarded it as a room, but what kind of space? Is it a corner of the building? You know, when you walk in, you know, is it where we have in that community center, we have the rooftop, you know, going up to the rooftop, you know, it's supposed to be open space, you know, so could it be a hallway? You know, what are we thinking? And also there's been other activities that have been proposed to bring the community together. So it could be just a space for both this kind of activity and others that is a safe space. To maybe the auditorium somewhere, maybe there's another community room that we have. I think that there are rooms that are made available for people to be able to have group meetings. But I think this is something that needs to be discussed with DPR, and that's not in here, but I would expect that the committee would come up with that.
I think Pete, John, you had your hand up?
No, sorry.
Well,
Peter?
I read the work group's report too, and that is what I think it turns out the interpretation was right, that we're talking about dedicated space, and because it could mean actual physical space, a room. I mean, I'm not sure there's a consensus for that. So if we accept Randy's friendly amendments to the language on the table right now, it at least lets the commission and its standing committee go forward and hash this out. Otherwise, I mean, I think the alternative approach is not to do to drop this one. I mean, you know, like just vote no. I mean, so, but one way or the other, I hope we decide. So,
I think actually Michael Gibbons put some language in the chat that actually I kind of like. And we could still use the basis of Randy's friendly amendment, but instead of saying to publicize and hold, to ensure that racial justice outreach and educational activities
are what?
Yeah, to create an opportunity in a community center to ensure that racial
justice and
that outreach.
Outreach and education are you know, are.
So can I ask a question? It's 6 minutes to 9. Do we want to, and we're coming back for additional meetings on at least the 2 other working groups. This one, I'm wondering whether we should table. I mean, Cal has an idea in the Q&A.
So does Michael.
And so does Michael, and Randy is working on language. So I'm just wondering whether this is something that we should try to work on it and come back on in the next meeting with, because for me, as I read the report, as I said, my understanding was we were talking about a dedicated room. That's what the recommendation was, that we want a space that's called, you know, the racial justice, whatever the room is denominated on. But that's what the principal focus was, whether you show artwork in the hallways or you have a bulletin board that announces something. It seemed to me was secondary to physical space. And so if that's what we're really talking about, studying the recommendation that to be, I mean, of course, everything is study here, so it means nothing. But if what we're really talking about is studying the feasibility of creating a dedicated space within the community center for issues related to racial justice, and then we should say it. If that's what the recommendation is, and then we can vote it. And I would favor that recommendation of dedicated space in there, mindful of the fact that it may not be achievable, but that's not to say that it's not a good recommendation. And if it's not achievable, because for Chris's reasons that there's not enough space, it's too expensive, all that sort of stuff, then we're defaulting back to the normal processes of everyone has an equal opportunity to apply for space and use it on a event by event basis. But anyway, my thought is that this one needs the recommendation, not the thrust of what the report was getting at, but rather
The language.
language of this recommendation needs some additional thought in my estimation. But I'm happy, if people want to vote on it as is, I'm happy to vote for it, but it's
Randy,
it's
someone in the
confusing.
community has their hand up on this. Can we let a community member speak?
Let's see.
Michael,
Sure, yeah.
hang on. I'm promoting you, Michael. You're on.
Thank you. I don't want to belabor because I know how late it is. This might lend itself to one of those ideas about sequencing. That maybe in the short run, we'd ask a commission to affirm a recommendation that we develop programming about racial justice and inclusion as a regular part of our community center activities, and that we invite the small area team to consider including the idea of a racial equity awareness corner or center or space inside the renovation of the new center. In other words, a formal symbol of the community's commitment to something different than a Newell statue. A permanent thing that says this is part of who we are going on this journey, but it's sequenced. The short term would be, can we get some programming going? And then the longer term thing would be to recommend serious consideration of this as a component of the study and defining and refining of the plan for the new center, so that it's baked into our identity, something like that.
Right. And Michael, to that point, it does go back to what I'm suggesting too, which is that if this is going to be meaningful, we're talking about dedicated space. Otherwise, it's not much different than what there is now. So
I'm
I
gonna
like
move
this
that.
notion of the two steps that Michael's proposing, with an end game of the small area team or the Chevy Chase renovation team or whomever considering the dedication of space.
Well, I'm going to move that we defer this until our next meeting, and that we come up with language that's going to address all of these issues. And I don't think we can do that on the fly tonight. I don't think we can do it as well as we can do it if we wait.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of deferring this to our next meeting then? Okay. All right, now we are at 8:59. Do you want to adjourn now, or do you want to take up the last two of these recommendations, which will be relatively short, I think? Maybe I'm completely wrong. You think we should?
I think we should stop now and we should do
Okay.
the other commission business.
Okay,
That's what
all
I
right.
propose.
All right, although, is that okay with everyone to do that? Okay, all right. Let's talk just a second, if we could, while we've got people on the line here too, about when we can resume this again. I suggested the second and the fourth, but I understand the second, there's a conflict with the people who are working on a small area plan. So is the 4th of February a date people could do?
For 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock meeting on the 4th? Okay, well,
Yeah,
I'll go ahead and notice that as a special meeting, and the special meeting will be devoted entirely to further consideration of the recommendations of the task force. And I really do appreciate everyone's dedication to working on this, and it's remarkable. We've had, like everyone's saying, 23 days, and now we're going to have, in 1 month, we're going to have 4 meetings. That's highly unusual. I've never heard of that before. Probably very few commissions have had 4 meetings in 1 month. But this is an important one, and we will. And I think the only way we can reasonably do it is at a special meeting rather than trying to shoehorn it into a regular meeting.
That's right.
Okay.
so with these extra meetings, we get to take August off, right?
Yeah, double your pay.
Yeah.
Selden, we better
Michael,
negotiate
you
right
and
now.
the pay. You and the pay. It's not.
I didn't say the pay. Randy said the pay. I didn't ask you for vacation time.
Just comp time. Okay.
Exactly.
I
I just
right.
wonder whether legally you're allowed to volunteer time to the government. You can't volunteer time to the federal government.
Exactly.
Okay. We'll take up commission business then. We have the minutes for the January 11th, 2021 meeting and the January 14th special meeting. Lisa has prepared the minutes for both of those meetings and been circulated to the commissioners. Are there any changes or modifications beyond what people have already contributed and Lisa has incorporated? Okay, is there a motion? I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes for those 2 meetings. Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Beat you to it.
7-0. Okay. We also have 1 check to approve. It's for $306.04. That's for 2 months for Verizon. So I'll make a motion that we approve that check. Is there a second? All those in favor? 7-0. Okay.
Who seconded that? Peter?
Peter. Okay. Possible items for our February 8th meeting. We've been talking about the possibility of having DDOT then at that meeting for a wide range of subjects. DDOT is without a director right now.
Right.
So it might be better if we postpone it a little bit until a new director is named and has at least a couple of days in place. But yes, Lisa.
I'm gonna really adamantly oppose postponing.
Okay, that's fine.
Just because of my single member district, DDOT, we got Chestnut Street, Oregon Avenue, we got the major construction projects going, and they are really, I mean, to the point where they want a meeting before, you know, Councilmember George. We need to get them in here to answer to the public.
That's fine.
So we can do that with Denise and the
I
acting
think that-
director.
Well, the
Well,
meeting with
director.
Janice is a single member district.
No,
Right.
Denise.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Jackson.
Yeah, Denise is very helpful on lots of things, but she's not the right person to have at a meeting.
Everett Lott.
We need a
Right,
substantive.
right. No, I'm
Everett would be a
saying,
good
yeah.
person.
The acting director, exactly. Mhm.
Michael?
If we're going to go forward with this, and as I said previously, in support of what Lisa said, in my canvassing, this stuff was a real issue for everybody. We have to get cracking on if we're going to do it this way, we have to get cracking. And this is not a comment to you, Peter, because it's on all of us. We got to get cracking on the survey. If we're gonna have someone in there, I mean, we could just do it as, you know, a conversation, or we could do it on with a conversation with data behind it, which is that we conducted a survey. I've given everybody, but Peter said he would look at it, a draft which asks people to comment in survey form about their experiences as pedestrians and car drivers and others, so that when we go to this meeting, we say, hey, look, here's what our community thinks of DDOT responsiveness and the like. So if we're going to have this meeting, which I favor, we've got a lot of work to do to get this survey written and approved and circulated and tabulated.
Peter?
Oh, sorry.
Peter
I'm gonna
has
raise
his
my hand.
up.
Sorry. Mhm.
Peter?
Michael, I think this survey is very useful. I don't think we can get it out and get an adequate number of
Right.
responses in the 8th is what?
2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, really, we have we've done well tonight, but the meeting, the 4th, is going to be, there may be some substantial disagreements, and we need to, each of us, be able to articulate, be prepared for that meeting. That's going to take work. Connie and I have a meeting, the first meeting of the Community Advisory Committee for the Small Area Plan 2 days earlier. I think that we ought to pick a set of topics for DDOT to address on the 8th, and then come loaded for bear at another meeting. And I can't help but believe we can get them to come back if we, if we raise Kane. So
Connie?
Yeah, I followed up to try to get all of our 311 requests. I was hoping to hear last Friday, but hopefully this week. And then we'll have a sense of all of the requests that have come through in our own inbox, and also that's been directly sent to DDOT, so that we can formulate the categories and then send out that survey. But I don't think we necessarily have to have the survey results by February 8th. I think we could report out on the survey after that, but we should still have DDOT come, as Commissioner Gore has asked for, so that they can give their presentation as they normally would and tell us where things stand. And I think Mr. My God, is it Elliot Lott? What's the name? Everett Lott, right? He can come. He lives in Ward 3, and he can come present and introduce himself. 4? Well, I was told 3. So 3, 4. We're the same. We're the
3,
same.
4, but he's
We're
physically
same. All right, fine. There's a competition going on here. Anyway, but what I was going to say was, I think that we should spend the time, like Commissioner Gosselin said, to really get a good survey with actionable responses back, so that we can analyze what it is that we have here with concerns, because I know that there are many.
Lisa?
I was just going to add, I mean, everybody made great comments. I was just going to add, my 2 topics, Chestnut Street and Oregon Avenue.
I think that's worth doing, because both of those are longstanding projects.
Yeah.
We know a lot about them. We know a lot about DDOT's failures or successes in those areas. So I think those 2 issues we need to address with DDOT, and we should limit it to that.
Yeah.
And then we'll have another meeting with DDOT to address a broader range of issues. But I think you're right that Michael and Peter, that we need the survey. And Connie, I think the 311 responses would be a helpful part of that. It might even help us in developing the questions for the survey to know what the 311 requests have been. And so I suggest that we limit the meeting on the 8th of February to just the Chestnut Street and the Oregon Avenue construction issues. The other things we're going to have to do, we have this public space permit application that we do have to get on the 8th, because that needs to be done well in advance of the Public Space Committee's meeting. There's also I got a request from the new executive director for the Chevy Chase Main Street to make a little brief presentation about what's going on with the new Main Street, and they're just getting organized now, and so I think that's a worthwhile thing to do at that meeting as well. And there may be other things that will come up between now and then. I don't think we should load ourselves up too heavily on these meetings, because obviously they end up taking a lot of time, and we do need to be respectful of our audience's time as well. So I don't think we should go past 9 unless there's something urgent that has to be addressed. Okay, anything else we should talk about before we adjourn? Okay, thank you all. This was a productive meeting, I think. We got through a number of things, and we'll resume again on February 4th.
Randy, just one thing, Randy and Lisa and Connie, please get back to me on my email about time for tomorrow.
I said anytime after 2 o'clock.
I will do it. Yeah, I will do that right
Okay.
away.
And
Thank you,
Randy,
guys.
Yes, Randy, do you save the chat? Because there is some language in the chat on the,
Yeah, Stephanie does.
yeah,
Stephanie
okay.
saves the chat and she saves the Q&A. So
Perfect.
that just
Okay.
has to be given to us though.
Okay,
That
Okay.
does,
thank you.
yeah.
All right.
Easy to say.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you,
Stephanie's
everyone.
got it. Okay, thank you all
Yeah,
very much.
okay.
Awesome.
All
And
right,
thanks for
guys.
all the people who attended too. Thank you
Yeah.
very
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.